The light bends near the sun due to its electric and atmospheric lenses, not due to gravity pulling on it. Electricity is the force which can bend light. Since so-called light is electric and has no mass to pull on or warp according to the dysfunctional academic theories, it is claimed that magnets bend light as well, like in mass spectrometry. However, the force is so-called magnets is actually electric and not magnetic force, since electricity is the only force in the universe. So we're getting into magnetism. What he's saying is that magnetic light is still, it's stillness, and it's the electric currents, the electric universe that we're seeing that's creating polarity. So real quick, basically you have a planet, and at its center is stillness, and then it creates shafts and vortices that move outward, but they're actually moving inward. They're all the motion of electric current is actually moving inward at the poles like this, and then every now and then when things get just right, it will spit out bodies of energy at the equator. It's a pretty bad drawing, but you get the point. And so it's constantly seeking its center, its rest. And this whole idea of a body is just a shell, so to speak, that's spinning through with electric currents so fast that it creates a balance or creates an equilibrium. And since space is cold, that form gets frozen, so to speak, or gets animated and held in animation until it unwinds or finds its time to, sort of its entropy, it's time to die. And then it'll go back into stillness. So the point is that every body that we've ever found knows what basically is oriented north and south, east and west. So for some reason, all bodies, all planets, all people have a head and a foot, have a top and a bottom, and they just know which way is up and which way is down. So hopefully this sort of opens the door for people to think about the electric universe, and that light is actually traveling in spirals, and those spirals rotate at a certain rate, and they rotate so fast that they appear to be solid. They become dense, so to speak. But what's at the core of those is not actually a point. It's not a proton, it's not an electron, it's not a neutron, it's not an atom. What we perceive to be an atom is actually just electric waveforms folding over each other in certain places to where they appear to be quantized chunks, or they appear to be whole. They appear to be bodies, but they're not. They're just folded in, and then at certain times they fold out and disappear. And we can sort of see this with the idea of photons in the double slit experiment. They say is photons are both light and waves at the same time, but they're not, because an electron gun, which supposedly shoots photons as a particle, supposedly shoots electrons, is not actually shooting an electron. It's shooting an electric current, shooting an electric light, is shooting an electric wave, spiraling like this. And so you could break up this wave if you want, as many times as you want, and you could just say, oh, well, this little chunk is a particle, and this little chunk is a particle, and this little chunk is a particle, and this chunk is a particle, and this chunk's a particle, and that's the way they're approaching it. But in actuality, what's happening is this thing is not broken up. It is electric waves of light, and there is no particle involved. So hopefully that helps you to understand that no one's actually ever seen an electron. No one's actually ever been able to isolate an electron from the nucleus of an atom, because, well, the nucleus of an atom doesn't exist, an atom doesn't exist, and an electron doesn't exist. So they're basically just they're using, academic language to say, oh, we've isolated this electron. But the tools that they're using, if you're going to actually look at what's happening, is shooting an electric current of light. It's shooting a beam of light, and beams move and light moves in waves. So they're not actually shooting particles. So hopefully that helps. It's time for a new approach to the universe. It's time to look at things as nature is presenting them to us, not as we are projecting them onto nature. Okay, feel free to comment, feel free to share. Thanks for listening.
what you have to say about the arts and how the arts are going to be an answer.
You mean how can doing art save the world? Yeah.
Or a smaller version of that.
Oh no, we always go to the top. If it doesn't save the world, why bother even discussing it? It's sort of the... Yeah, well, it's an interesting question. I mean, in a nutshell, and I'll go back to it, but the reason I think it's so important is because when we grapple with the problems that are, you know, many and complex around us, the tendency is to go for rational solution. But you might bear in mind that the consequences of rational solutions are what we are dealing with at the present. Rationalism has been the dominant paradigm for problem solving for about 500 years, and it has led us deeper and deeper into contradiction, resource mismanagement, dehumanization, misperception of each other, so forth and so on. That's why, in a way, I think that the art reflex is more important because, or more efficacious, because if we act from the point of view of wanting to create art, what we're really saying is that reality has outrun apprehension. We can no longer make rational sense out of reality, so the ego is set aside and the logos or the muse is invoked, and then we produce art. And almost the distinguishing characteristic of great art is that it not be fully comprehensible to its creator. So we then act as agents of the logos when we create art. And the art that is created is then put out into the cultural environment of meaning, and is then subject to a kind of natural selection similar to the kind of natural selection that goes on in in an environment where biological species are competing. The shorthand way of saying this is the best idea will win, but it won't win unless it competes. You know, you can't win the race unless you run the race. So rather than beating our brains against the end of history, trying to create rational solutions to what is essentially an irrational situation in the first place, it would be, I think, much better to become servants of the logos, servants of the Gaian mind, and then to let the chips fall where they may. Let the selective pressures of intellectual history sort out among the many options, and those that are important will come to the fore. Does that get it as a brief pass? Why it's important? It's important because it's anti-rational, because it's anti-ego, because it says we are vessels and agents of the solution, but we can't, it doesn't spring from our ability to integrate data and reflect it back. It's much more irrational than that. It's sort of the question, what is reality, number one, and then what's so great about it? And
why bother?
Yeah, why bother? I mean, we really have a bee in our bonnet about reality. When you get out of touch with it, this is considered not a good thing. Reality is the unmoving reference point in a universe of flux to which we are always supposed to go back and re-reference ourselves. And it's a funny concept first of all, it is a concept. It's not an object with its own interior ontos. In other words, it doesn't have being outside of the culture's assumptions about it. This is the first big news about reality. The reality of the Witoto is a completely different reality from the West European or the Canadian. And yet the reality is, we assume that there is a kind of bedrock, and we call that reality, then everything is referenced back toward that. It's an incredibly slippery concept. You know, you're always going toward it or looking back at it, but you rarely have it in front of you in the moment. And yet the moment is where we spend most of our time. So we're kind of run ragged by the nostalgia for something we never knew, is what it almost comes down to.